All right, welcome back to the Cryonics Underground after our short hiatus. And we are back officially with kicking the year off, the lovely and talented Rebecca Ziegler from Tomorrow Bio. She is the product manager and a standby perfusionist with the Berlin standby team. But most importantly, as we all know, she is the newest member of the Cryosphere moderator team. Welcome to the show, Rebecca Ziegler.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a bit about yourself first, right? So you grew up in California in the States, and then you went over to Europe to do your undergraduate. And then after that, so you got a degree in business. And then after that, did you go directly into working for Tomorrow Bio?
Yeah, so exactly. I guess you gave already the brief summary there, but I born in Palo Alto, parents in tech, but my parents are not American, they're German, so I always had that kind of connection to Europe. Was there until high school, and then I decided to study in Europe for a few reasons. First of all, it's less expensive, but also I really like the fact that you can go directly into your major. So in the US, they have a lot of kind of general ed courses required in college, which is great if you don't know what you want to do, but I knew I wanted to do business. So it was great that I could kind of dive directly into that. So I studied in the Netherlands, international business. And then as the last part of my bachelor's, I had to do an internship. And so I had the idea of Berlin in my mind. I was looking and I stumbled upon Tomorrow on LinkedIn, of all places. And the actual position itself wasn't that interesting. I was social media intern, which is not really what I wanted to do. But I looked at it, and as soon as I realized that it was about cryonics, I was like, okay, now that's interesting. Like this is something that I would actually be very interested in doing, as opposed to working for some, I don't know, random corporation. Something I'm actually passionate about. I've always, from the family background or whatnot, been into kind of cutting edge tech type stuff. And always kind of thought cryonics is something I'd probably want to do one day. I just had no idea that it was a possibility to work in it in Europe. So applied there.
Hold on, I want to take a quick step back because you said something interesting. With why how did you know that you wanted to go into business?
So my dad is in business, like he has his own company. So it was, although funnily enough, when I first started getting interested in business, it wasn't because of my dad. It was because I went to a school in California that was partially funded by some former like Apple executive. And he would do these little entrepreneurship clubs on Fridays where we would just talk about all sorts of business things with kids. And that's where I first kind of started getting into the topic. Was just very excited about the interesting thing is, so I was kind of thinking between politics and business. And my father had the same kind of thing when he was younger. Politics or business were the two things he was thinking of. And both of us are now really happy that we didn't take politics. The older we get, the more we realize how little you can actually achieve with that. Whereas business, if you're good at it, you actually can push things forward. And I just really enjoy the amount of impact that you can have with business. It's not the actual business part itself that's interesting, but kind of specifically like picking a topic that you really care about and turning that into a business is the best opportunity to push it forward, in my opinion.
So
as opposed to just
entrepreneurship.
being, yeah, exactly. Yeah, entrepreneurship. Yeah. So that's, I guess, how I got into that. Yeah.
And did you worry when you went to college for this that, so you said that you wouldn't have to deal with the prerequisites like you would back in the States in most schools here. I was about to say, did you worry that, or was there some sense in which you might not have been as well-rounded, but from getting to know you, you're quite well-rounded, more well-rounded, I would say, than virtually most people, almost anybody who goes to school and takes all those prerequisites. But is there something that you felt like you missed because you didn't sit through, various random college courses?
Yeah, well, I guess I did get already a little bit of the college courses because in my my hometown there was an option in high school to take courses at the local community college just to get kind of ahead in credits. So I took 5 courses there. None of them were business related. So I got already a little bit of a feel, I think, for some of those more general classes. And I took a lot of APs, which it's not the same as college, but it's supposed to be college level, right?
Yeah.
So I think that already gave me enough of the rounding that I would hope I have a well-rounded background.
So you were saying that you heard about Tomorrow Bio, you got this internship because it was connected to cryonics, and you had some pre-existing interest, at least in unusual stuff. Maybe not necessarily cryonics or specifically cryonics, or what was the interest?
Yeah. So I've thought about it a lot, and I can't remember when I first heard about the term cryonics. But it was something I remember when I came across Tomorrow again. I knew what cryonics was, and I remember thinking in the past, like, this was a thing that I would like to do someday. It just made sense, but it wasn't something that was kind of constantly on my mind. It was kind of in the back of my mind until I saw it again at Tomorrow. But yeah, I was always kind of interested in these tech topics. Actually, the first line in the job posting on LinkedIn referenced it linked to the Cryonics article that in Wait But Why. And I recognized Wait But Why immediately because I had already read it. I was a big fan of that blog, so that caught my attention. And then when I saw kind of the topic, I thought, okay, this is very cool.
Had you already read the Wait But Why article on cryonics at some point?
Not about cryonics, no. I'd read other ones, but I hadn't read that one yet. Yeah.
When Daniel and I were talking about this some prior to sitting with you, we were talking about whether or not if your interest in cryonics had come up beforehand. Daniel was more of the opinion that people's interest in cryonics comes more naturally from a concern over death and dying and mortality, and perhaps our interest in escaping our own mortality. Maybe Daniel, I don't want to put words in your mouth. But how did you describe it?
So I was going to ask you, and Max can point out why he disagrees with this. You're a very young person who has this interest in cryonics, which is abnormal to some extent or an outlier. What weird, complicated relationship with mortality did you have that this was even interesting or on your radar, or did you have to have this, or did it just come naturally without, did you have grandparents die, parents die, some, a hamster that you loved that died in your arms and you cradled it as its last breath left and you were like, this is unacceptable, like, or was it just logical? What brings you to think about death so early?
Well, it's a funny story because we did actually have some hamsters that one of them had a pretty traumatic death, actually escaped the cage, and then brother accidentally stepped on it with a giant cast on. Very traumatic stuff.
See, Max?
I can't say
well,
that,
but if one of us got stepped on by a giant, depending on how bad the stepped on is, I would think we would no longer be candidates for cryonics. Right, it's like getting run over by a very large bus. It's bad. You don't want to go that way.
But
yeah, exactly.
It put death on her mind. I'm putting words in your mouth now.
I mean, that did happen, but I really don't think I had any particularly weird or more thoughts about mortality than an average kid or young person. And that is something interesting, actually, that we've noticed working for Tomorrow, because one of the things I do, I give consultations to people that are interested so they can book a call, and I usually do the ones that are in English, and a kind of a pattern that I've noticed, or that we've noticed, is that, like, there are definitely the people that are kind of afraid of death and think about death at least more often than your average person, but that's not the majority of people that are interested. A much larger group just generally like life. They're optimistic about the future. And it's more viewed as kind of like a rational decision. And this is also kind of a pattern that was confirmed. We had, a few months ago, we had a social anthropologist at Tomorrow for a few months. She interviewed some of our members, and she also noticed that her assumption going in was also that a lot of this was going to have to do with fear of death, but that actually most people just thought of it as a very rational decision of yeah, this seems better than cremation. I like living, so it makes sense, right? It's like a weirdly unemotional decision for a lot of people. And I think I would fall into that camp as well.
I think that's some points in my camp here, Daniel. So
yeah, no,
yeah,
it feels very counterintuitive to me, honestly. And we've debated this, like liking life, like you have to dislike death to like life, right? Because I mean, in order to want to keep living, you have to want to not keep dying.
well,
Yeah.
It's this weird. It's this weird. I think you're right, and I'm the one who's not viewing it correctly. And I know your survey, you had questions that confirm this, you know, data and what have you. And so I will slowly concede the point. But yeah,
I do want to
strange.
press on this because this is a topic that has come up in the community many times, and there are some individuals who, maybe like you, Daniel, who feel very strongly a sense of mortality salience or anxiety around death, or you have a certain connection with death, and cryonics is your way to be able to sleep at night a little bit better, knowing that there's at least some potential remedy for that thing you lose sleep over. But most of us, I think, at least most of us who are into cryonics, are not that way. And it's not that it's buried so deeply that we just don't understand how we truly, really are worried about this. But, you know, the deepest sense of denial is that we deny that we even care about that, or something like that. I don't think that's the case. And when we were having this conversation, I thought of a great way to a great analogy for this, which is imagine there's somebody out there who really loves flying. Okay, so they love to get in airplanes, they love flying, they think about how cool it is to be in an airplane, where you could go when you're in an airplane, how awesome it is to be above the clouds and controlling the avionics and all that stuff, maybe even helicopters. And then somebody comes and says, the reason that you're so into flying is because of your deep-seated denial of gravity. You know, there's this thing called gravity. We're all subject to it. All gravity pulls at every single one of us. And you want to fly because you're in such deep denial of the truth of gravity. And maybe, right? Maybe in some deep-seated way, you know, my love for flying is because but actually it could just be that I love seeing how things look above the clouds, and I love being in an airplane. I love controlling the airplane. So I think the argument that cryonics is really deeply, truly about our deep-seated denial of death is a very circular argument. There's no way to get out of it, right? Anytime that you say no, it's not really about that, it's just, you know, more evidence that of course it's more deeply about that. So I think I want to lay this one to rest. There really are some people who are into cryonics because of their deep-seated concerns over their mortality, and there really are many of us who are not that way.
Yeah.
In fact, according to the survey, and not all the result, you know, when you're listening to this, the article on this may or may not have come out, but most people, and this confirms the other information, or speaks more to what your researcher was saying. Most people are not into cryonics because of that. Most people are into cryonics for other reasons: adventure, wanting to see the future. You know, would be analogous to wanting to be above the clouds and really enjoying the airplane. They're not in it because of their mortality salience, just like pilots are not in it because of their fear of gravity.
Yeah, something, obviously, since working at Tomorrow, I've started thinking about death and mortality a lot more than I had previously, just I guess as part of the job. So I really did try to think, like, am I afraid of death? And in my perspective, I think that death feels about the same as it feels before I was alive, just nothing, right? And I will be incapable of caring about the fact that I'm dead. So being dead, I just, there's nothing about that can be scary to me. It's more just, when I think about death, it's more sad that I'm not going to be alive anymore because I like life. And that would, like, the thought of being dead is kind of sad to me right now. There's nothing about it that really brings me fear. And I assume it's kind of similar with a lot of people.
So I agree with that. At the very least, will you concede you are at least afraid of the way you die, like being crushed to death by a giant in a cast?
Not actively. I'm sure if that was happening, I would probably not be super stoked.
Okay.
But I'm not like actively afraid of this. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a little bit like saying, but look, I get you really love flying, but if I shoved you out of the airplane and you didn't have a parachute, wouldn't you really be afraid of gravity?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. You put that thought into somebody's mind, well, shoved out of the plane with no parachute. But until you squish that thought into the person's mind, this is not what the driving force really is.
And I can say
Yeah.
this is important to know, and I'm I'm glad between the survey and your work at Tomorrow Bio that you're coming to these conclusions, because I think that would probably be a good guide for how you appeal to a larger swath of people versus what I would have assumed, which is, appeal to their fear of dying, which would have probably the exact opposite effect on that kind of person.
Yeah.
It would
Also,
probably push them
maybe
away.
also a little morally questionable to kind of mark it on people's fears as maybe not the most ethical approach.
I mean, maybe to me, it's I would say if so long as you're being genuine and not disingenuous. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm just surprised more people just walk around on a daily basis knowing that this personal Armageddon is coming for them, and that they're just fine with it. That's how I view it, like a ticking, like I'm wearing some ticking time bomb, and
Yeah.
it's going to explode at some point.
Yeah. And I think for people like that, it's good to make them aware that we exist, but I don't think we need to do anything to give people extra fear of death. We don't need to bring out more fear, right? We can just say whether or not you're afraid of death, here's kind of what we have available, and figure out for yourself whether or not that's something you want to do.
I agree. That's the correct way. I got the fear angle covered for you guys, so don't worry about it.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and different minds really think differently, like in ways that it's hard for us. Like it's hard when you're in one mindset to truly be able to put yourself into that other mindset. You just have to like acknowledge, like, they do exist, they think differently about this than I do. It's okay. We all have our different reasons. Moving on from the topic of death salience. Before you came onto the scene, Becca, Daniel and I and a few others thought of ourselves as the young whippersnappers in the cryonics space, shaking things up with our Discord and our podcasts, and here we are, the millennials, talking about this, and now we are well beyond that. How do you feel like age and the fact that you are younger to the whole cryonics space, does it feel like there's a divide in the cryonics community? Certainly, maybe not so much with Tomorrow Bio, because you guys are literally a brand new company into the scene, but do you get that sense of a big division between people who have been in this space for decades versus people who are just coming into this space? Is there a very obvious dividing line?
Yeah, that's a good question. The one thing that I've noticed a bit is that the cryonics as an industry, even though it's not that young, right? It's about 50 years old. It hasn't changed a lot relative to the rest of the world, I would say. And so I think a lot of the older people that have been in this space for a long time have just kind of gotten used to the industry being as small as it is. And people that are a bit younger and a bit maybe more open-minded to technology, and they see how many of their peers are open-minded to technology, believe more in the potential to kind of push things forward and not just kind of stay in this one kind of small, slow growth, stable area that the field is in right now, but actually transform it into something that can become a larger part of society. That's maybe something that young people have a bit more energy for, and maybe a bit more optimism, because they're kind of newer to the space. And they know how many young people, I guess, are more techno-optimistic than previous generations.
Do you think that's actually a difference between the kinds of people who are getting involved now versus the kinds of people who might have been getting? I mean, you weren't around, right? So historically, that might be difficult to conceptualize. But yeah, but it seems to me like there could be two effects, right? So like the people who are interested in cryonics now really are quite different from the people who were interested in the past. Or maybe it's just that they're so much younger, but once they get older, they're going to end up looking a lot like the cryonicists who are now, significantly older.
That could be the case as well. It's hard to tell which of the effects it is. It's also something not exactly related to this, but generally age related, right? I've kind of noticed in cryonics, right, is that there's this big cryocrastination problem in cryonics, right? People that are interested, they know they want to sign up, but then they procrastinate for a long time. And you would think, okay, but this means that all those people that were cryocrastinating decades ago when they were younger should now all be signing up, right? Eventually, when they get older, because they were always thinking when they're young, yeah, I'll do this when I'm old. So shouldn't they be? But it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that there is really a gap between how many people are interested when they're young and pushing it off to the end, and the people that actually, once they reach that older stage, actually do it. And there can be a multitude of reasons for this. One could be just kind of poor financial planning, right? So cryonics, it can be expensive, but if you plan it ahead of time, you get into it in your 20s or 30s, it's doable for most people. It's very achievable. But if you don't really start thinking about this seriously until you're older, you might not have as many options, right? But another reason that I have kind of considered is that as you get older, your neuroplasticity decreases, things hurt. You kind of forget, in a way, what it was like to really enjoy life in the same way. Like you forget what it was like to be really excited to learn new things and to be excited about the future. And I wonder if that's part of the reason why people who thought in their 20s or 30s, I want to do cryonics, but I'll do that later. And then once they actually got older, they're just not as motivated for life anymore because they've kind of forgotten that. And that could also in some ways play into the same effect, right? Also within the cryonics community of maybe people that are older are just a little bit less excited about the new things and just kind of want to make sure everything's kind of stable. Which also has its value, of course. It's really hard to say though. A lot of these are just theories, and I don't have any data on this, but it's kind of an impression that I've gotten.
This reminds me of another conversation I had some couple years ago now, where it was actually more useful to people to think of that. So a lot of times people want to think of themselves as one continuous person, since the time you are born to the time you die, you're the same person, but with you change slowly over time, but you're really the same strand throughout. And sometimes it's more useful to actually think of yourselves as different people over time. So actually, instead of thinking of yourself as continuous, thinking of yourself as discontinuous. And in that way, you can say something like, I don't know whether that person in the future is necessarily going to want or have the incentive to sign up, or have the whatever it is, to the desire to sign up. Like you said, people's minds change as they age. They have different priorities. But if I can make it really easy for that person who I will become to be signed up because they're already signed up, like it's the default, like they're already opted in, and now it's going to be more work to opt out, that might be advantageous to the person I am today, right? Because the person I will be has something in common with the person I am today. So the person I am today can kind of put make the opt-in model for them, so they don't opt me out, right? In other words, like, do it now while you have more of an incentive and you have more of an interest and such, rather than hoping that person in the future is going to have that incentive, and because they may end up screwing you in a way, right? They may end up not having that desire to, and there's a lot of cases where we're even surprised somebody who, when they were younger, had a lot of interest in signing up, had a lot of they said it publicly several times, and then old age comes and they drop that desire. So
I've seen, I agree with all these things, and I know there's a lot of theories, and I hope we can whittle down the what the biggest problems with cryocrastination are. But I've talked to people, and even recently a specific person who actually I think is a listener of the podcast, who's in their 80s, and they are, you throw away all the stuff about neuroplasticity. This person is can keep up intellectually with the young folks. They're smart. They believe in cryonics. They listen to podcasts, and still there is cryocrastination even at that point, and not from any desire not to do cryonics. They want to, and when we talk, they are interested in signing up, and they're still, even then, just the same exact like weird kind of barrier that you hear from young people. So I think there's all these factors, and then there's just this kind of pure momentum hurdle that you just have to get over, no matter what the situation is. I don't have a strong point for that, other than to say that there's a whole bunch of factors, and then there's just a kind of a just do it factor that that has to be overcome.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I think part of the reason that cryocrastination is such a problem is because there is no one cause. It is kind of a multitude of different things working against people. Something that I think somewhat cryocrastination related, that I think traditionally cryonics orgs have gotten kind of, I think, wrong about people that are interested in cryonics is obviously us here, and anyone that's like really working in cryonics is very passionate about it. And you think, of course, I'm really dedicated. I want to do this. Nothing could have stopped me. I was going to sign up and I was going to secure my cryopreservation. And so you kind of assume that everybody who decides they want to do cryonics is the same. They're very determined and very into it. And I think that's just not the case. And I think the mistake with that thinking is that you don't really focus on the kind of the businessy user experience side of cryonics. You don't try to optimize how easy it is to sign up, and how easy it is to find information and get your questions answered and that kind of thing. Because in their mind, right, like anyone who's really into the topic, you think none of those things should be barriers. If you really want to do cryonics, you'll find a way. And something we've noticed at Tomorrow Bio, because we put a lot of work into making this process as easy as possible to sign up, making ourselves very reachable if anyone has questions. That seems to be not the case. We're kind of surprised sometimes at how we'll have people that will start the sign up process. This isn't the majority, but it's a surprisingly large number that will start the sign up process. Then in their insurance application, there's like some hiccup. Maybe the insurance wants some kind of medical document to check before they'll get the approval. And then the people just kind of drop off, which is, it seems bizarre because it's like this person cared enough to already do the sign up and start the whole insurance process. And clearly they want to do this. Like, why would a little hiccup stop you from your chance at potentially living much longer and extending your life? It seems very irrational, but I mean, humans are not these pure rational beings. So it actually seems like the more and more that those barriers can be removed, it won't solve the problem of kind of cryocrastination or make this a huge topic, but it absolutely does make a difference.
Something that helped me personally was to decide on a trigger. So say at this, when X happens, then I will sign up, and make X realistic. You know, so somebody can say, well, when I get the next job, or when I get the raise, or when I'm ready, you know, when I turn a certain age or whatever, and then actually, you know, like set it in your mind that this is gonna happen when that, and then for the people for whom that trigger can work, it can be very useful. It worked for me. Yeah. People need to figure out what it is that gets them motivated to do things that might take a few steps and get it done.
My trigger was a gray hair. The first gray hair. I was like, this freaking gross meat body I inhabit is rotting in front of my eyes. And so that was like, okay, this is real. I'm melting away. The melanin is leaving me. And
you know, some people get grays in their teens. I mean,
we'll get on it then. Whatever works for you. Yeah, I'm saying it doesn't have to be your trigger, but for anybody in their mid-20s, feel free to borrow that trigger if it gets the job done. We're gonna shift gears a little bit, go into, Rebecca, your role, and I know you have one role as a product manager at Tomorrow Bio, another one, and we'll talk more about that later in depth. But you're also a standby perfusionist. So could you tell us a little bit about what that entails?
So for our standby teams, Emil, when he was first kind of thinking about setting up these teams, he was thinking maybe you would want 4 people per team. As we've kind of practiced, done the procedure several times, we've noticed, okay, 3 people is actually plenty. Like the 4th person just kind of gets in the way at some point. And so there's kind of 2 people that are doing the more surgical part. And then there's 1 person that's by the perfusion circuit. And this is the less sterile person, because traditionally, most of the time, people haven't cared much about being sterile during cryopreservation, but we want to at least try as much as possible to do this to a high medical standard. So the two surgeons that will be kind of next to the ice bath on both sides, they are as sterile as possible. And then I would be taking equipment, opening it and putting it on a sterile tray. And then also, any equipment that needs to be handed to the team, also unloading kind of cryoprotectant and adding it onto the system. And a lot of and before you attach the perfusion circuit to the patient, you have to do something called priming the circuit, which is basically you just start running cryoprotectant into the machine, but the pipes or the tubes are closed, right? So you're not actually pumping in anywhere, it's closed, just so that you can get all of the bubbles out, because bubbles very bad. Don't want to put that into a patient. You'll get kind of these blockages. That's kind of one of my jobs. And then once everything checks out, everybody double checks this because it's very important, but mostly I always have to be watching out in case any bubbles appear. And then after the perfusion circuit is attached to the patient, my job is to kind of control the flow of the machine so that the pressure stays at an acceptable rate. One of the reasons that it's not good to have like a funeral director, for example, do perfusion, even though they do it with embalming and whatnot, is because they're used to working on people that are dead and tend to stay dead. So they'll use pressures that are like 10 times higher than a body would normally endure, which can cause a lot of rupturing. For us, we make sure that the pressure level stays at a normal human pressure level so that nothing ruptures. And especially as you get into higher concentrations of cryoprotectant, the pressure ramps up. So you have to kind of slow that down. And I always have to make sure there's more cryoprotectant bags replaced. That's, I don't know. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but that's roughly.
There's some people who will find that and 10 times more of that super interesting. But it was actually very interesting what you said about the funeral directors and how they are working with bodies that they don't ever plan on reviving. But there's also kind of the interesting idea that so you're not classically or medically trained. Could you tell us the difference between hiring trained personnel who have a medical background versus non-trained personnel, and what kind of why is one better than the other? Have you had some kind of complications? Because medical personnel are working with live patients, and so they probably also have different considerations than funeral directors. So you're kind of inhabiting this middle space where the patient's not alive nor dead.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, well, the first thing is that even if someone is a medical professional, nobody is going to be trained for cryopreservation procedures ahead of time, because the things that you learn in medical school, whatever you do, it's just going to be different. Everyone, regardless of their background, if they want to be part of a standby team, they need to be trained fully in this procedure. Nobody can just immediately start doing it. The reason that we have doctors for the kind of more technical surgical part is because every case is a bit different, right? So things can go wrong, right? If this patient has been dead for a long time, and for example, we had it wasn't like a case with our patients. It was a kind of body donor that we worked on, where body donors, as opposed to a real case, they're usually a bit older, right? So this body had been dead for quite some time, and so there was we were pushing cryoprotectant in and nothing was coming out. And if you are not a medical professional, you're like, okay, this isn't standard in my procedure. I don't know what to do here. I have no idea what could be causing this. I have no conception of anatomy and what could happen, right? So someone like me, I can be trained in the standard procedure. But the reason you want someone with a good medical background is when something goes wrong, or just not even wrong, just unusual, that you would have a sense of what can we check to figure out what's going on here, right? Like what can we, in the case of this, in this case, we took out a cannula and noticed that there were like blood clots. You can remove those and then start that again. I would have had no idea to do that, right? And most people would, regardless of being trained in the procedure, have no idea. So I think you don't need everybody on the team to be a fully trained medical professional, but you want at least one so that for any of that variability that happens, you have someone that can kind of improvise in an informed way.
And do you find when you're looking for these people, maybe you have options of non, medically trained ones and medically trained ones? Do you find that if you had the option of both, that you choose one over the other? Is it easier to train people with no medical background or untrain people with a medical background?
I think medical is like generally better. You never really know how you're going to react when you're with a body, right? So this is something that on my first case, they were very cognizant of, like, how am I going to react? Like a lot of people, even in medical school, their first anatomy class, there's always several people that faint, and those are people there trying to become doctors, right? So you never know. So the nice thing is with medical people, okay, they're going to be comfortable around this kind of thing.
How did you feel when you were on your first
Fine.
body?
Yeah, so I guess I don't know if you'll ever talk to our Dr. Rishi, but at least from what he tells me, he was surprised by my ability to be calm in that scenario. I think the key for me is just like, you just don't think about it too much. You just kind of do it, which is I think what a lot of doctors end up doing is you go into kind of action mode. So far it's been good. And something I just want to add, like I said, I don't think I should ever be leading a case because I don't have the same ability to improvise. Emil really believes that everybody on a standby team should know how to do every part if necessary. If something comes up, you should know how to do it. So I also have been trained in like also doing the heart part with the purse string suture, trained on like first on these kind of dummy things and then on like pig hearts, which are very similar to human hearts, so that in case something were to ever happen, Rishi's in a coma, Emil is in America, right? And I got to lead a case that, I could do that. So I think that's also an important aspect. So I would say, just to go back to your question, generally it's probably better to have medical personnel, but it's not always necessary. I think if you have someone that's kind of interested in learning how to do it, we're happy to train people and kind of see if they have the ability to respond well, and also with the training on like hard pigs, you can kind of get a feel for, does this person have the skill to do it?
Recently on the Cryosphere, we had a Tomorrow Bio member who was asking if there was any work to be found in the industry. And given that Tomorrow Bio is the biggest game in town in Europe, well, for one, are you guys currently hiring?
Yes, I don't think we have currently any positions open for medical personnel right now. We don't need anyone. We're always, with a caveat, we're always happy for people that are interested to train them in how to do this procedure, even if they don't become like a full-time professional. We've also started getting contacts and want to do more trainings with local teams that wouldn't do the full procedure, but they could be a first response. So for example, if a patient dies suddenly in Spain, that there would be people we could call that could go there and do the very first very basic things to kind of stabilize the patient while the professional team is on its way. It can already make a big difference. So we're always happy to anyone who just wants to kind of volunteer, get involved and help in some way, to train those people. And also we have kind of first aid kits, which we would sell without any profit to anyone who's interested in setting that up. For kind of a more full-time position, I think the best options would be, if someone's interested, is to go more of a research direction. I don't know exactly how, if the European Biostasis Foundation is hiring additional researchers right now, but if someone was interested, I would recommend reaching out to them. And if there are no positions at that time, they would at least be able to point someone kind of at the other small, like there's different university professors that are doing kind of smaller projects in cryopreservation research, and could at least connect people to those groups.
You're working in Europe, and we get the luxury here of having to almost exclusively interact with English speakers. But how does it work when you're hiring as an organization, when you're dealing with so many different languages from both customers and employees? How do you manage?
Obviously, it's going to be unrealistic that we have someone that speaks all the languages of all the countries where we have members. We have members in over 20 countries now. We don't have someone that speaks Hungarian, right, or these kind of things. So for smaller countries, there is still some barrier of, if you want to fully understand everything, you have to know some amount of English. Luckily, that is already the case. In Europe, a lot of people know at least a decent enough amount of English. But we do also, the five main languages that we kind of support are the English, German, Spanish, French, and Italian. And for those, at least, we always have someone that any customer could have a consultation with and could talk to. It's not something that we have kind of explicitly hired for. At the end of the day, we think it's more important to hire for like people that are really motivated for this topic and also have the skill kind of to push things forward. But we've also had enough interns from different companies, just because Berlin is a very diverse city. And so we just naturally have gotten a lot of applicants from different places. And so even we have a former French intern who still does consultations for us. So we still kind of have those connections. So far that's worked out decently well, but of course it's not a perfect solution. We don't have someone that speaks every language. I don't know if that will be realistic unless our membership is way higher than it currently is, but so far we've made do.
And does Berlin have enough interest, enough people interested in cryonics, or have you guys considered remote workers? How do you view that, or do you think you can draw everybody from locally?
So far we only take in person, so no remote. At some point we might change that because obviously you do get access to a much larger talent pool. Berlin is nice because it is one of the biggest kind of startup hubs in Europe. So that helps a lot. So there is definitely a big pool here. The reason we don't do remote right now is because even though, okay, I'm a product manager, right? And I do a lot of stuff with product, but I also do a lot of other stuff. Like giving consultations isn't something traditionally a product manager would do. So in any kind of smaller company, there's always going to be very fluid roles. And I think that's something that's really difficult with remote because there aren't these it's hard to set up good KPIs, these key performance indicators, and track how someone's doing and constantly manage them when things are very dynamic. And there's no one doing a similar role that you can compare to see, how well they're doing. So at some point we might do remote, but at this point we've gotten enough good people in Berlin and it's just easier in kind of this small dynamic environment that you have everyone in one place.
Finishing off on this topic before we move to some kind of broader issues, just so people can get a sense of what it's like working for Tomorrow Bio, what would a normal day for Rebecca Ziegler look like going on the job?
That's tough because I think I really do different things every day. But I would say the most common things that I'll work on is something kind of website related. So our website isn't like custom code. It's built with one of these kind of web builders called Webflow. So anytime we want to build a new web page that explains something, or we recently added kind of brain cryopreservation as an option, creating the pages for the sign up, for the explanation, and creating the sign up flow and the automations, all that kind of thing would be my job primarily. So those kinds of things are a lot of what I work on. There's also a little bit of always dealing with kind of consultations, customers, various things like that. Then kind of on a broader, I guess, office environment, it's pretty international, pretty young. I don't think we've hired a single German. I think Emil is the only German, and it's not something we've done on purpose, but because the office language is English, I guess a lot of Germans don't really want to apply to an English job, and so we've just naturally picked up all of the expats, which has made kind of for an interesting environment. It is definitely a bit different than maybe a traditional company because it is more of a long-term topic, and there's a mix between like business stuff and there's like medical engineering stuff happening also. But otherwise, it's not like some really crazy, weird, different organization. It's in some ways also kind of a standard startup feel.
Sounds like a very dynamic, interesting place to work, honestly.
The twinkle in Daniel's eye as he's saying that. I had a random idea occur to me as we were talking about perfusionists and the standby team and everything of that, which was going back to flying. Pilots get trained, do a lot of training on simulators. And so I wonder if it would be possible to create a simulator of a, of a standby and field cryopreservation and all that sort of thing. I was thinking about this, and I was remembering that there's actually a game on Steam called Surgeon Simulator, which like puts you into, I think they even have a VR version of this, maybe a mod for that game that would be like, here's, the simulation for a person who is looking to have cryonics performed on them. So
even more so, you've just touched upon a potential secondary source of revenue for the millions of young people who want to play some virtual game where they can be, who are looking forward to becoming virtual cryoperfusionists.
That's
absolutely
obviously a very
business.
profitable idea. Get on it.
People need to, that's a gold mine right there. So Becca, tell us about Tomorrow Bio's recent expansion into the US. Right, we understand that Tomorrow Bio is now going to be able to provide their services in New York, Miami, or I guess South Florida, San Francisco, and there was one more. Was that right?
Portland.
And Portland.
Yeah.
So there are, of course, two cryonics organizations that have traditionally provided this service for the United States as a whole, rather than just specific cities. So what is it that you guys as Tomorrow Bio feel like you're able to bring to these places that might be a better service, and maybe eventually a better price point? What is your value prop? What is your competitive edge, and why are you doing this now?
Yeah, sure. So first thing I have to note is that we haven't expanded yet into the US. We've kind of announced our plans to do so.
Got it.
The first teams will probably be in Portland and New York, probably this summer, and then the ones in Florida and San Francisco would either be the end of this year or more likely sometime in 2024. So the reason that we're only offering this in kind of limited areas is we really want to be able to offer a very high quality service, right? Speed is very important in the quality of a cryopreservation, or almost certainly it is. Maybe in the future, all of this will be whatever, we can fix everything. But as far as we know today, it's definitely a lot better to be fast. And like you said, there are two other organizations in the country that already offer this. So we didn't really see that much of a point of having this basically just being another provider that offers kind of a similar version. So we wanted to focus on a few areas where we know we can provide something with a much higher likelihood of quality because of the vicinity. We're only going to be accepting members that are like very close to one of the standby teams. The exact ranges are still going to be determined. And then beyond that, there are some kind of minor differences that people can decide whether or not they think that's valuable. One of them is that our patients will still be stored in Switzerland at the European Biostasis Foundation, which, some people might prefer the US. Some people might think Switzerland seems like a safer bet. And then other small things where we would always do kind of field cryoprotection, which is something that isn't done in most cases with organizations, unless it's with ICE, International Cryomedicine Experts. They also do field cryoprotection, but in most cases that doesn't happen, except we are always going to do that. That's one of our main goals. In terms of price point, the whole body is about the same as Alcor at the moment. We do have now a brain only option, which is 60,000 euros or $60,000. Which is a bit cheaper than, I guess, the Neuro at Alcor. It is also important because people are constantly assuming that we mean Neuro when we say brain only, but we actually do mean brain only.
You guys are first going to be expanding into New York and Portland, right? and then the others will come later. Is it that you're looking? Is it that you feel that the product that you can provide, the service that you can provide, is going to be of a higher caliber for individuals who live in that area over what CI or Alcor would be able to provide in that area? Can you give us a pitch as to why? Right. So, like, if I was living in New York, I'm currently signed up with Alcor. Why should I switch? I mean, besides
Sure.
being stored in Switzerland versus, okay, there's that, but
In most cases of death, there is some amount of forewarning, and then ideally, a standby team would go to the patient ahead of time and kind of wait there to start immediately after pronouncement. Practically, that doesn't always happen, because it can be hard to predict exactly, even when there's forewarning, like cancer is getting worse, seems bad, it still can be very hard to predict exactly when a patient will pass away. And also there are, of course, many cases when the death is sudden. And in those cases, it's going to take a long time for a team to get there if they're not in that city, right? So you're talking about many hours, potentially a day. And one of the things that people often assume when they first hear about cryonics is like, oh, but the person is dead. Does that even make sense if they're dead, right? People have this conception of death as like a single moment where you're, one moment you're entirely alive and the next you're entirely dead. And that's on a biological cellular level really not how it works. Death is kind of a process, right? So normally, a person can't survive for more than 6 minutes without oxygen before permanent brain damage occurs. But that also does depend on temperature, right? So that's why you will hear of the cases of people in Sweden falling into frozen lake and being underwater for 40 minutes, no oxygen, and then being brought out, rewarmed, revived, no brain damage, nothing. Because when you lower the temperature, you slow down the metabolism, which then decreases the amount of oxygens that cells need to survive, right? So when someone first dies legally, it's not like all the cells are completely depleted, all the oxygen gone, everything is just completely dead. The body is in that process. And you want to, as quickly as possible, start lowering the temperature so that you can stop that process of self-recycling that cells begin once the oxygen runs out. The faster you can do that, the more that's being preserved, right? The more the parts of the brain that make you, the memories, whatnot, the more that's being preserved. It is possible, right, that in the future, even if there was a significant delay when the procedure started, that future nano neurosurgeons will be able to piece together how things were supposed to look, potentially, but it's kind of not ideal to have your potential life and revival rely on that being the case, right? Our job right now in the present is to do a cryopreservation as high quality as possible to give you the best chance of being revived. And one of the number one things we could do to make that the case is do it quickly. There's a huge logistical problem there. If you are in hours and hours away by car or by flight from a standby team, there's a huge risk that that's not going to happen. And practically, in most cases, it doesn't happen that quickly. So if we want to give these people kind of the best chance of being preserved.
So the pitch is that you guys, because you have standby teams in those specific cities, can offer standby stabilization and field cryopreservation, which is going to be better for individuals who are in those areas than if they didn't have your services and instead stayed with Alcor or CI and only got their version of standby. So in other words, your standby is better. That's the reason that somebody in those specific areas should consider switching over when you are deployed there.
Yeah, so again, not necessarily, right? So if there is good forewarning and you can predict really well when someone would pass away, then Alcor could also send a team ahead of time, and then it could work out that there's not a huge difference there for the timing, but practically in a lot of cases, there's a good chance that speed will really matter. And then the rest of the differences are kind of in the details of, like, we do the full field cryoprotection. We have doctors on our standby teams, that there are some differences in the details of the actual procedure, which I guess I would, obviously being biased coming from Tomorrow, I think that those are improvements on the procedures, but of course, I'm sure everyone would advocate for their organization.
So I'm not fully satisfied with that answer. And first of all, let me just say I think it's great you guys are expanding. This is not a criticism of anything, but I love playing devil's advocate. So
Sure.
just playing devil's advocate, why not just focus on Europe? Why? What's going on in Europe that you feel you need to come to the new world and expand here? Is everything going okay? Have you reached your saturation point for finding new members over there? What's been going on membership wise since we last had a meal on the podcast?
Yeah, so there's nothing wrong with Europe. The more it's that the standby teams that are going to be built in the US, 3 out of 4 of them are going to be set up, mostly funded and set up by partner organizations. Because the US, having been in the cryonic space for a lot longer, there are a lot more of these smaller organizations that are kind of trying to push cryonics forward. And so there's more of an opportunity to collaborate with them and get a team there set up. We would love to also do more of those in Europe, and we have set up teams in Europe. The problem is that a lot of those kind of labs or organizations that would be willing to help fund and set up those teams just don't exist in Europe. Otherwise, we would also be building additional teams there. But it was just an opportunity with these organizations in the US that we already had good relationships with, already wanted to set up a standby team where we said, okay, great, let's make this kind of a partnership. So there's not really anything like wrong. There was just a good opportunity for us to bring a high quality service, at least to some areas in the US. And of course, in general, we think that this will help our membership growth, also ability to fundraise, which will allow us to try a lot of new ways to kind of reach new members and all of that. So there's no kind of really dramatic reason for it. It was just a good opportunity. So we thought, okay, why not offer this? But again, we didn't want to do it just exactly the same as the other organization. We should just be like another organization in the US. That's why we're kind of, at least for the time being, doing it to these limited areas, because we hopefully in that way are offering something that is a bit different.
Do you think it's a better idea for someone who's a cryonicist wants to be a cryonicist to end up in Switzerland versus ending up in Phoenix or in Detroit?
It's hard to say because none of us can predict the future, right? It may very well be that all of these areas are totally safe and totally fine. But if we're looking at kind of the risk factors, there are reasons that we picked Switzerland, right? So historically, socio-politically, it is incredibly stable, right? Hasn't been in a war in 500 years, which is, much longer than the US has even existed. Geographically, it's very safe, but that's also, I think, the case with the US areas as well, luckily. And then there's also some kind of legal differences that are probably a little favorable in Switzerland. There's less of a worry of like religious kind of interference, and they're very liberal, not in the Democrat liberal kind of sense, but liberal in the broader sense of that word, where they don't interfere. Switzerland, generally, the people, the culture, and legally don't interfere with things that aren't seen as like being directly harmful. So it's very unlikely for them to ever have some kind of issue with cryopreservation. And then also specifically around nonprofits in Switzerland, there are stricter oversight rules, which we think are favorable for kind of long-term alignment. So for example, nonprofit organizations in Switzerland, they're overseen by a government organization that ensures that they never change the mission and purpose for which they were founded, right? So there's a group that will ensure that EBF doesn't suddenly decide, okay, now we're going to do like cell cryopreservation, right? Like obviously that's not in the plans, but if you're thinking about hundreds of years, just to like ensure that there's no chance for any future people to try and misalign any organization, there's kind of extra securities that help. Again, I wouldn't necessarily say that any of these things will end up mattering. It's very possible that they don't, but there are some factors that if things go wrong, I would feel a bit more secure in Switzerland.
Somebody who's interested in cryonics and is in one of these areas and would be willing to do this, is there any good reason why they shouldn't switch over to Tomorrow Bio and they should stick with Alcor or CI?
I think it depends somewhat, I guess, what you value. So obviously, CI and Alcor have been around for longer, which comes with its upsides and its downsides. The upside is, I guess, there is a little bit more feeling secure that they know how to last for a long time. Of course, we've set ourselves up to also last a long time, but I understand that saying that and actually having the track record to prove that are different things. So people that really care about having that track record, they might just feel safer, right, with Alcor or CI. Other reasons, obviously, CI is still quite a bit less expensive. We do, in the long run, hope to be able to significantly reduce our costs, but whether or not that would be as inexpensive as CI, very unlikely that would be happening anytime soon at all. So that is kind of another reason to maybe stick there. One small difference also is that Alcor uses M22, whereas we use an optimized version of VM1. In kind of perfect lab conditions, it's been shown that M22 can be slightly more favorable. We've opted for VM1 because that slight difference in lab settings, which is very different than real world settings, we don't think is worth the cost. We think it makes more sense to have additional funds for really quick logistics. But if you think, no, I want the potentially slightly better cryoprotectant, that could be a reason also why you would go for or stick with Alcor.
So I'm sure you all did the market research prior to doing this. Do you think that most of the people who will ultimately end up signing up in the coming years in one of these locations, do you think most of those are going to be brand new cryonicists who happen to live in that area, or do you think a lot of them are going to be people who switch over from one of the other existing organizations?
Probably most of them would be new. A couple of reasons that are kind of simple. The facts that our sign-up process is much easier. Like we said earlier, we think it's kind of a mistake to assume that everyone that wants to do cryonics will push through no matter what. Doesn't seem to be the case, which we can kind of see by the fact that we are, while still smaller than Alcor and CI because we're much newer, we are growing at a much faster rate than they are. And I think in part that is a lot to do to the fact that we've made this process as simple as possible. And in general, like we're not doing we've never done any marketing or messaging specifically to try to poach people from other organizations. It's not really something that we want to do. This isn't like a cutthroat competitive environment. Ultimately, we want all the organizations here to succeed. It's too small of a space to kind of view it as this zero-sum thing. I think a lot of the people that we will be reaching will most likely be new. There isn't really that big of a pool in those areas already to pull from. It wouldn't really be worthwhile if our only goal was there to take over these members. Our goal is to make more people aware of the option there and give more people the ability to sign up.
Yeah. I think that's a big question in a lot of our minds, whether the number of people who ultimately would sign up for cryonics is significantly larger than the number of people currently signed up. So, so would Tomorrow Bio opening in one of these places really be wrestling away the customers that already exist at Alcor or CI, and that might be a good thing if you really are providing a better service, or are you able to, with the way that you reach people, are you able to really bring a lot of new people into the space? Both of those. I think it's not quite clear just how many people in the world would really be interested in cryonics and really sign up fully, because of course the message isn't as easy to get out as we all hope.
So we did actually a sentiment study a long time ago. I think it was even done before I worked at Tomorrow, where they did a large kind of study to see how many people would hypothetically be interested in it. I can't remember now exactly what the results were, but I do know that a surprisingly large percentage of people would say they would think this is something they would seriously consider. Obviously, those amount of people haven't signed up. but it's not necessarily because they hate the concept. There's all sorts of problems like cryocrastination and funding or whatnot, but it seems to be the case that there are a lot more people that would sign up than at least currently are signed up. Whether or not the numbers actually end up being, millions of members or whatnot, that would be hard to say. But at least how small Cryonics membership is now is not. It's very unlikely that we've reached the peak, and also in kind of our growth and our outreach, we've noticed that that hypothesis so far seems to be the case.
And since you've mentioned that you're growing kind of much faster than the other orgs, I think we had Emil on almost like a year and a half ago at this point. But since then, what has your growth looked like? How many members do you have? And how are you kind of seeing that growth expand in the near future?
Yeah, so exact numbers I don't have, but we are over 300. But how much over, I don't have the exact number now. So yeah, we're growing at around 20 members per month, which is about what the other organizations will get in half a year. So that is faster. It's still like quite small compared to where we think it can be, but yeah, it is a very difficult topic to market for a lot of different reasons. So we've been kind of changing a bit our strategy, and we'll see how that works. So even with the current growth rate, we think in the long term there's a lot of interesting stuff we can do, but our ultimate ambition, of course, is to increase it quite significantly.
You guys, of course, having the organizational dynamics that you do between the for-profit entity and the non-profit entity that does the storage. You guys have access to actually doing marketing properly and fully in a way that non-profits themselves can't, are not set up to do, and in some legal ways are prevented from doing. Do you feel that having that ability to really having had that structure from the start of Tomorrow Bio and EBF, do you feel like that's given you guys an ability to see things or do things in a very different way than Alcor or CI have traditionally done? What kind of strengths do you feel that provides your organization that you feel let you tap into all of these individuals who otherwise haven't been in cryonics that you think Alcor and CI simply can't do or haven't been able to do?
The obvious thing here is the marketing, but I think it's much more than just marketing. I think there's a real advantage to the fact that we at Tomorrow Bio are kind of running in some ways and making the feel of the organization like a startup, so, and like a business, right? Because it gives you kind of a focus on a lot of things, like kind of the user experience, like various kind of product and marketing, obviously, different aspects of a business that nonprofits are just not used to doing, and kind of having that normal kind of startup view gives you kind of an advantage in how you view the member, and the type of people that you will hire at a kind of a startup versus the nonprofit also opens the people up to a lot more opportunities, right? To people that are really focused on the future and focused on growing this thing. I think it would be a lot harder for people, a nonprofit, to hire someone that has a good sense for marketing. Even if they were allowed to do marketing, it's not necessarily something that's as appealing. So we want to make this interesting for kind of high performer, someone that wants to push things forward in a way that I think like a slow moving nonprofit organization never could be. And kind of on a broader sense, of course, I think having the separation gives you the freedom to, on the Tomorrow side, to adapt quickly and to make changes. Like, one of the things that I really appreciate about working at Tomorrow is if we have an idea for, we want to build this new webpage, we want to build this new survey, we want to do this thing, I can do that and execute it within a few days, very quickly, right? A nonprofit moves a lot slower. It's supposed to. and it's good that it does, because the nonprofit side is supposed to last for a really long time. There's a reason that we want patients to be stored at nonprofits. But the disadvantage of that is that anytime you have a good idea, anytime you have something that you think, this is something that I think could improve, help the messaging, this is a new way we could explain this topic, every implementation just gets slower. So I think there's an advantage both in just how quickly you can adapt to new ideas and how quickly you can execute, and also kind of the environment, the feel of like, hey, we want to push these goals forward. We want to be aggressive. We want to hire people that have kind of also that business sense and that business motivation.
I think it's very important the way you're describing it, which is that separate, there are some things even within the cryonic space which should be allowed to grow and change and adapt to changing conditions, and there are some things that we want to keep more stable over the long term. And having this split organizational structure where you have these two sister organizations, but which manage very different components, gives you both, right? You can have your cake and eat it too. Whereas where organizations structured as the two have been structured traditionally in the US doesn't give you the flexibility, only gives you the continuity and the stability. So,
and I think it's important to know the difference between what things need that continuity, right? So if you want to make big changes to how you're storing a patient, right? This is like a very important, impactful decision. You don't want that to be something you're iterating on and A/B testing all the time. It just doesn't make sense, right? You want your members to know that they're going to get the service they signed up for, and that there's not going to be a million changes between the time they sign up and the time that they're actually in a doer, right? But that doesn't mean that everything about this topic needs to be that slow, right? If you're talking about like, let's try to make a new checkout page so people understand how things work better, or a new kind of sign up form so that, or a pricing page that we explain things better, like it doesn't impact the overall service if you change that, right? Nobody is being harmed if you want to test different ways to explain things. But there is a real value in being able to do that quickly and figure out how you can communicate better and how you can hopefully get more people over their cryocrastination or whatnot. So the difference, there is real value in both. I don't think it would be good if Tomorrow Bio was doing every aspect, even the long-term storage and the fund management and everything. There, it's not like everything about a startup type of environment is good. But I think it was well set up that we really thought about, there are some things that should be slow and there are some things that should be fast. And that's something that's maybe been missing a bit in the cryonic space.
And one of the biggest advantages, I don't think you've mentioned quite yet, but it's the fact that you are bringing in financial resources into the space in a way that a nonprofit by itself can't do, is not set up to do. As much as some people don't want to talk about this, but the profit and loss mechanism, that is a very powerful motivator. And the more money that we can bring into this industry, at least through that door, even if it ends up just attracting a lot of people who ultimately then want to contribute into the nonprofits, that's great. But somehow they have to get in there, and there has to be that right incentive to get in there. So yeah, I think it's my opinion is that the structures, the nonprofit for-profit sister company type structure is a good innovation in this space, and hopefully there's some valuable lessons or some valuable ideas that the existing organizations can pull from that.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I've heard a lot of the calls that Emil has when he's talking to potential investors, and he always says, we're never going to sell this company. We're probably not going to, there's not going to be a going public thing. We do, if we become very profitable, we will, this is an investment, so we would pay some dividends. But if your only goal here is profit, don't invest, because there's going to be some other project there that has like better terms, right? The way we're structured also, we have a very specific structure so that investors have no ability to mess with us in the future. If they want us to force us to do something else in the future, they can't. They don't have those rights, whereas in most companies they would. So there are a lot of kind of those disadvantages. So the people that end up investing are genuinely motivated to move this topic forward, and in some ways kind of view it as a donation, right? Because they're not expecting to make maximum profits necessarily on this investment versus another company that they can invest in. But the reason that it's good to have it be an investment is a lot of these business people just don't like the idea of just donating. They feel better about it being still an investment, and they're just much more willing to get involved in that way. And so that does just open a lot more opportunities for people to put money into something to move it forward without necessarily thinking, I'm going to get huge profits out of this, but mentally it feels much better to them than I'm just donating to a nonprofit.
I heard something similar from, I think it was a couple of investors in sort of the longevity space, and maybe like the Aubrey de Greys and such, that before, when it was a nonprofit thing, you know, all you get access to is people's nonprofit, like you know, that they people, rich individuals and investment groups and all. You know, people will have a bucket of like, here's the charitable donations and charitable giving, and then, you know, there's that bucket, and then a much larger bucket for for-profit investments. So yeah, as long as if you can even name something as a for-profit investment, you get access to a much larger bucket. But I don't want you to. It almost sounds like you're selling it short. I do think there's a long-term, especially from an investor perspective, if you look at it in the long-term sense, cryonics is a market, is a space that as soon as there's just a few breakthroughs, one or two big breakthroughs, it is going to go off the charts. And so from a long-term perspective, I think it is a smart bet into a space that will have that, will come into its own at some point. It's just a matter of whether that's in a year, 5 years, 10 years, but it will happen. Maybe it's because we get a change in the cryoprotectants, and you can see under a microscope that you get a better result at the end ultimately, or something of that nature. Or maybe, and from a marketing perspective, we, you know, crack the nut of figuring out how to really sell this idea. But once we get there, I think it'll be a very good investment. So you know, don't sell the returns short, Becca. There's plenty of them there.
I don't. I mean, obviously that I agree that if we think the space has huge potential, and we think that it will become a lot bigger than it currently is at some point, and then we do intend to, you know, pay back through dividends the investors that helped make that possible and that you know, took that risk. Yep. But of course, it's not like the profits would all be going to investors. It's made very clear to the investors that most of those would be going towards research, because that is kind of the ultimate goal. So while we would, you know, want to give back enough that it was like a, you know, a thank you for the investment, we want to make that worth your time. Most of those profits, ultimately, the point is to be able to put a significant amount into research.
And maybe I'm being naive here, but at least the way I would think about it if I was one of those investors, assuming the investors are all Cryonicists, which I imagine there are at least a good percentage of them are, which is, you know, maybe all their money is not going back into profit, but the money going back into research is, I mean, ultimately helping them to, I mean, not arguably helping them far more than any amount of money, you know, not going to cryonics research would. I mean, your life is far more important than any amount of money you have to a given individual. So maybe that's an obvious statement, but and obviously everybody doesn't think exactly that way, because if they did, then it wouldn't be a small percentage of their money going to cryonics. It'd be all their money going to cryonics, or a much larger portion than what Max was saying, which is their kind of small allotment.
Yeah, but I think it's a good point. I think a lot of people do think, you know, a lot of these investors are still business people at the end of the day. So they are very kind of profit minded, but they do understand that this is different, and they view it differently than a traditional investment. It is more of a personal motivation. But that investment versus donating does make it a little bit, I guess, easier for them to get involved.
I still feel like you guys are somehow selling this short. Like, investing in Tomorrow Bio and other cryonics organizations, it gets you in the ground floor. So when this thing takes off, you know, we'll be minting millionaires and billionaires. That's, you know, that's what I'm gonna stick with. So
Max is writing checks as we speak.
Yeah, you know, I got my I'm ready. Here we go.
had an observation. It was at the Teens and 20s conference, and there were some international cryonicists and just a lot of different kinds of people. And we were having these discussions, and I was so amazed, and this is gonna be high praise for cryonicists in general. I was so amazed by the breadth of the discussion, by the amount of interesting and weird topics discussed, by the level of kind of intellectual rigor, by the insane curiosity. And I was like, and even we had gone out to restaurants after, and we were having kind of dinner, and I was kind of like overhearing some, like a group of people at a different table talking, and it was just so bland in comparison to kind of it was sports, well, it was a bunch of guys, but sports, women, and I can't remember what else, but it was just so boring. And I don't know, I'm feeling emotional welling up for this kind of camaraderie, kinship topic. I don't know if this
they might say they might say, Daniel, the same, no, it's you who are boring. We're talking about the interesting topics, sports and what was it? Sports and women. But you're talking about this weirdo stuff, for nerds or something. But
it wasn't just cryonics. We're talking about the future and nuclear war and the past, and we were going everywhere, just like 20 different topics. It was so interesting.
My guess is one of the reasons that that's the case is for you to consider cryonics, you have to come over a lot of or overcome a lot of kind of like normativity bias, in a sense. Like, one of the big reasons I think that cryonics isn't bigger than it currently is that whenever there's something kind of new, novel, not mainstream, people are not really properly weighing the downsides of the current thing. So for example, this whole idea where most people are like, I'm 85, that's fine. Like, why do I need to live longer, right? It's like a huge normativity bias in the sense that, okay, for most of human history, the average life expectancy was like 30, 40. Like, back in our hunter-gatherer times, it was very low. And nowadays, if someone were to die that young, everyone would say, yeah, they died way too soon, this is tragic. But back then it would have been normal, and they would have been maybe saying, hey, why do you need to live to 80? That's ridiculous. 30 is fine. That's normal, natural, right? And in that same way, just because it's like normal, natural to die at 85 now doesn't mean it's good. And another place where I see this kind of pop up is when I'll have people in consultations, or just generally when talking about this topic, they'll say, yeah, but in the future, if I were revived, I'm not gonna have a job. How would this and this work? And that kind of thing. And I'll say, okay, like it's possible that there will be struggles. I have reasons to believe it probably won't be that bad, but I'll acknowledge it's absolutely possible. But the thing that they're not discounting is the alternative is to be dead. It's like, convince me why it's better to be dead than to maybe face some of these challenges, right? But anytime something is the norm, you are completely discounting the downsides to that thing in a way that doesn't make sense, right? And I think for someone to be into cryonics, they kind of have to overcome that barrier of thinking about, of just taking the norm as good. They have to think outside the box a little, and that will translate into other things as well, like how they will talk about the future, the kind of conversations they will have. I think that's probably a big part of the reason why potentially cryonicists are a little more interesting in more ways than one.
And this brings into a theory I had as to why it's so hard to convince more people, why we've had such a difficult time getting more people to become cryonicists. The things that we do around dying, and whether you get buried or you get cremated or whatever, and what one does at the kind of end of life, and how one deals with that. Those are traditions that have been around for religiously for hundreds of years, or whatever the case is in one's given culture, but for a long time, and they're very deeply ingrained, and they're a part of family rituals and religious rituals and what the community does, and whether here, in this place where we cremate, over here we bury, for very important reasons. And so it's very deeply ingrained. Death rituals are something that go back thousands of years, to our history. Now, there's a lot of things that go back and are deeply ingrained, and yet they are still able to change for many people. And I think that's because a lot of us humans naturally rebel around in their teens, 20s, maybe even in 30s at some point. They kind of have this instinct of like, I want to do something different than the way my tribe has always done thing X. And so they're going to try doing different things. They dress differently. They want to talk differently. They want to enjoy life differently. They want to have different relationships with each other. They want to do things differently than their peers. But they're not thinking about in the distant future. They're not thinking about things that far away. The distant future normally, and maybe Becca, you're quite an exception to this, but I think the distant future for people who are in their teens, 20s is like 10, 20, 30 years away. Mm-hmm. And they don't conceptualize that they might not be there, around when they want to be there. And the distant future, like you're saying, could really be thought of as 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 years away, if only we had longer lifespans and if only we were somewhat different. So instead of rebelling and thinking, well, I'm gonna rebel against the traditional ways in which my culture has always, done this death thing. First of all, you don't think you're gonna die. You don't have this conception of not being around. You're always gonna enjoy the adventure and the future and all this when you're at that age. And it's just some of us want to keep enjoying that adventure into perpetuity. But I think if it happened to be the case that older people had that same ability or that same instinct to say, I'm going to do something different than my culture has always done, or I'm not going to go through the normal way, the normal practices that I have in this, then we may see many more cryonicists. But by the time people get older and they start to think, well, maybe I won't be around in 50 years or 100 years, and that'll be a cool place to be. By then, all that stuff is ingrained. Well, it's the default, it's the given. I'm going to end up buried in the, same graveyard where my last 3 generations have been buried or whatever. So, yeah, I think that means that if only, young people just don't have that same sense of the part, eventually the part, actually, it's not that the party's going to end. It's that the party's going to keep going. You just won't be there anymore. But the party's going to keep happening. So if there were a way to get people to think about that fact and realize that there's so much adventure to be had in that far future, and you won't get a chance to be a part of it, maybe we'd have more success.
As much as I could pat ourselves on the back for being cryonicists all day, I'm gonna move on to some technical things because I don't want us to skip by it. So earlier on, you had mentioned, Rebecca, the new brain only option from Tomorrow Bio. So I want to make sure we cover that, because that's, I think, very interesting. I think when people hear that, they're gonna want detail. So first off, so we can distinguish this, what is the difference between this? And I don't know if, first of all, what do you call it exactly? How are you referring to it?
Brain only cryopreservation.
Okay, I got it right. Okay, so what is the difference between a brain only option versus Alcor's head only option, also known as the Neuro?
There's 2 reasons that we decided to go for brain only as opposed to Neuro. The first is price, right? So a big part of the price associated with cryopreservation is the long-term storage cost, right? You need the space in the dewar with liquid nitrogen, and you need the funds to keep it there potentially like for an indefinite period of time. And brains are smaller than heads, so that is one kind of very simple way that you can bring down the cost. And our primary recommendation is still that people get whole body. It's the more practiced procedure, so it's a little bit better understood. Although we don't think it's likely to be the case that this will be a problem. there are some revival scenarios where it might be a bit easier, a bit less expensive, whatever in the future if you have the whole body. And so our general recommendation would be whole body. But there is a real issue with the fact that some people that want to be cryopreserved just can't afford it, right? So we wanted to make an option that still has this really high quality standby, still in a very secure location, everything, giving people the good chance of being preserved and revival, but at a kind of a more achievable price. So with that goal in mind, brain only does make that a little bit price a little bit lower than head. The other reason is also a lot of the legal challenges that have happened in the cryonics field have been over neuro. And one of the reasons that may be is because to any relative, any judge, any whatever, the thought of a decapitated head is pretty not great. But brain biobanking is already a thing. It's like a much more kind of medical thing, like we're preserving a brain than like a decapitated head. It's a bit of it doesn't necessarily make a big difference in terms of the actual procedure, but it's likely that there will be less of these kind of legal kind of mental problems that you might run into with mainstream people with a brain as opposed to a head. And then, of course, the chances of revival realistically are not going to be different between a head and a brain. So there was no downside from that side. So kind of the combination of price and likely going to be easier for the mainstream and relatives to accept is why we decided that brain only is the option that we'll offer.
Can I interject here real quick though? I want to push back a little bit because I thought that when if you're preserving the brain, you are going to have to put it in something, right? You're not just going to like take the brain and dump it into the door, right? You're going to put it in like, I don't know, like a football helmet or something, that's like that's gonna keep it in place and like and so one of the things that Alcor says about their procedure is that the head is essentially for protection, right? It offers like physical protection for the brain, and it happens to be perfectly molded for that particular brain,
Right.
and like just the right, it's like you get a delivery from Amazon, from wherever, and the foam is exactly molded to the thing that you're trying to protect. So is it, how much less space? I mean, and is it really even about the space? Like, I can't imagine it costs that much more to have like a little bit more volume. Convince me here a little bit better.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, you obviously are not just gonna straight throw a brain into the dewar. But you would put it into a protective case, of course, and the head could be a protective case in that sense, but not every part of the head is necessary. Like this upper mouth jaw area, this is just, it's not really doing that much extra for protection here. And then kind of the neck, wherever with the carotids and whatnot. I don't know, to be honest, exactly at what point the Alcor is doing the removal there, but it is a pretty significant portion that it is just not necessary. And of course, it's not a huge difference. That's why the price isn't like a massive difference, but it is meaningful. You can put more brains into one dewar than you can heads. It's kind of that simple. But of course, you're right. There is still an extra protective layer that needs to go around, but it can be more efficiently designed to meet the needs of just the brain instead of all this extra stuff.
Your other point to me was very good, the one about the legal ramifications, and really that's because of the sort of human or inhuman aspect that some of these things may have. I think there might be like I'm sure you've heard of this, or listeners may have heard of this idea of an uncanny valley. So where if something looks very realistic, great. If something looks completely unrealistic, that's great. But if it's somewhere in the middle, that's creepy and weird and bad, right? That's where we start to shudder at like certain CGI in a movie where you're like, it's not good enough to be good, but it's not bad enough to be Toy Story, and it's something in the middle, and that's just not working for me. Yeah, so I think brain, you look at a brain by itself, it doesn't to me, it almost doesn't feel human. It's just like a weird organ or something. It's like looking at a liver.
Like a medical thing.
Yeah, it's like a
we're used
medical
to seeing
thing.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you see a body that is, a full body, and it's, I mean, a dead body or preserved body, and that's weird, but it's a body. And okay. But then you see a head by itself. Now that's creepy, right? I think that's what a lot of people might have a problem with.
It might be a bit frustrating for cryonicists to kind of hear this and say, why are we trying to appeal to the normie, so to speak, and why are we trying to appease the mainstream? And I understand that can be frustrating to someone who doesn't have these uncanny valley feelings and that thinks this is just kind of a medical procedure. Why are people being so weird and getting creeped out by it? I understand that can be frustrating, but at the end of the day, as an organization, we want to be practical. We want to give our patients the best chance of being cryopreserved without the legal issues, without the problems from the family, and hopefully, obviously, making this topic more mainstream in the long run. And so even if it's annoying, maybe to people who don't have these feelings of uncanny valley, at the end of the day, we do have to be practical.
Yeah.
Now, I noticed, so since you're still kind of very outwardly saying you think whole body is the better option if you had to take your bets, which is actually quite different in terms of perspective of how I hear Alcor talk about neuro versus whole body. The sense I've gotten is that they believe there's some actual benefits to neuro over whole body, and it's not they don't view it as just the budget option, or at least people I've talked to. I think even Max Moore has said he prefers the neuro only option. So it's not just people who work there who have experience with it think that's better. So what is different about your guys' perspective on whole body? I mean, again, you're doing brain only, which is not neuro. So yeah, I guess I'm saying why is whole body better aside from just having slightly more experience with it?
Sure. So I don't know what Alcor says exactly now, but I know it definitely was the case that they were saying at some point people were thinking that the neuro might be better. And the reason they thought that is, the brain is the thing that's really important, and we will just be reaching that and cooling that down quicker. And that, if we just do we go through the carotids to do the perfusion, that's going to get to the brain quicker and results in a better perfusion. With a bit more kind of research and as time has gone on, that doesn't seem to be the case. So the reason is if you have a case with very low ischemia, right, that like you get to the patient very quickly and then you go through the carotids, you will be able to get everything in the brain, probably. You'll be able to perfuse well. In that case, maybe it's going to be slightly, very, very minimally better. But in almost all cases, there is ischemia. There is some amount of delay, even if the standby team is in the city, right? To actually, for moment of pronouncement for them to start, there's some delay. And the problem is that there can be, if there's any amount of clotting, the carotids are only perfusing from one direction. Whereas the aorta, where we perfuse for whole body and also for our brain only, it goes through all directions. So if there's any kind of blockage, you want them to go from every angle to get in to every crevice as much as possible and actually perfuse better. So that's why, with a little bit of an understanding of how in practice these cases work, we think it's always better to go through the aorta so that you're perfusing better in non-ideal cases, which is most cases.
And if I could add another argument for whole body over neuro or brain, it is that a lot. I think we still live in a world that is subject to the cultural mores and norms and legal institutions run by what we would call normies, right? Non-cryonicists, and they will be subject to seeing that other stuff in weird ways. Decapitated heads or whatever, and that is what they are very likely to call it. And so if there's ever a situation where you hope that person who is in cryopreservation will be treated as a person and not as a piece of meat or a quote unquote decapitated head, then it's a lot better to look like a person, you know. So if imagine you're in a court and there's a bunch of jurors there and they're all deciding on whether or not you will get the chance to be revived, and the decision rests on whether or not you are really a person or are you a piece of meat, and that's, you know, you're not a person. If you appear to be a person because they, you know, the defense can say, look, it's a look at the person, you know, look at the body, etc. I think that's going to matter more. And so, yeah, so you know, keep in mind that we live in a world full of people who will see it in a particular way, and that it could be advantageous to be seen in that way in the future.
Yeah, I agree. Although I don't. I mean, I would say on that, as a counterpoint to that, right? If a whole body is, you know, evokes, you know, emotion of humanness, and a brain evokes nothing, or maybe not nothing, but far less, you may have the opposite problem. But I agree to some extent. You know, even a face, even though a decapitated head has a face, something doesn't jive with the general public about it.
I'd rather the world view me as a person stored in a giant metal canister than as a head stored in a giant metal canister. Yeah. And the body, unfortunately, for whatever reason, it is connected with personhood in the mind of normal people, and many Cryonicists as well, I think.
And so while we're still on this, for the exact procedure for the brain only, how much harder is it? Well, for one, kind of what is the general procedure for getting the brain out with not too much detail, and how much harder is it than I wish I had the proper word so I don't have to call it decapitation, but for the neuro process, how much more difficult is it? What's done differently?
Yeah, so for that, on a very technical level, I'm not going to have the expertise to answer well. You'd probably have to talk to Emil or our Dr. Rishi. But the good news with kind of the brain removal is that it is already a well-established process in medicine. So it's not like, you know, in a lot of cryopreservation procedures, these are a lot of new procedures. But for taking out the brain, that's something that's already pretty well-established, luckily. But very technically, what the differences between those two are, I think you'd have to talk to one of our doctors.
A final question on this is, so part of the reason that you had mentioned, you know, you guys are offering this is for more people will have an opportunity at different price ranges, but given that you're generally catering to a younger audience who's going to be using, you know, life insurance, and you know, life insurance has you know, amazing benefits when you're young. How price sensitive are these younger customers that there's a kind of a massive difference between, you know, the price of a the price of a brain only and the price of the whole body?
Yeah, well, I don't think that price has that much to do really with how willing someone is to sign up. It is more meant for not necessarily our average member, but we do still get people that contact us that are terminally ill, that are older, where term life insurance isn't really an option anymore. And for those people, you know, to have an actual achievable option, brain cryopreservation can be that, whereas whole body might just have not been realistic. So I think for kind of the average 30-year-old member, it's not really that big of a difference. It's unlikely to be the difference in motivating to sign up versus not sign up. But we didn't do it because we thought we would get way more sales or anything. It's more just you know, for all the times that we would get calls from people where, you know, they're terminally ill, they don't have their life insurance, they're already quite a bit older. It is really kind of, you know, terrible that there's not that much we can do. And so we wanted to make sure that there is an option which in some ways maybe is slightly worse than whole body, but is certainly a lot better than cremation.
I want us to move on to the subject of marketing and branding. That is one of the big advantages to the structure of Tomorrow Bio, and something they've been able to do. First, can you give us an idea of how do you guys as an organization conceptualize what your real product service offering is, right? So, and I ask this because I can imagine there's two ways to conceptualize, a few ways maybe, but at least two big ones. One is that you are offering the service of cryonics or biostasis, as you guys prefer to call it, I think. The other one is that you're offering that cryonics is kind of almost incidental to the fact that you're offering a chance for indefinite lifespan. Marketing both of those, conceptualizing those is quite different. So how do you guys conceptualize it? What do you guys feel like you're really offering, and help us understand that framework some?
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of changed over time. In the beginning, it was more of this, okay, we want to introduce this topic to people, explain, kind of fight against a little bit of the normativity bias, explain, why this could work and the possibilities that it potentially allows you. We've started to move away from that. And the reason is that we've noticed that whether it's cryocrastination, whatever it may be, if people are just learning about the topic for the first time, even if they're very interested, they understand everything, the price isn't a big problem, they just don't sign up immediately. For whatever reason it is, they just don't. So we have at this point, and we'll certainly come back to it, and we certainly do educational stuff, but we've moved more towards a focus of, okay, if we want to start growing faster, right? Not to 100,000, but to kind of the next growth rates that we need to, for temporarily, stop focusing on the people that are just hearing about this topic for the first time. We'll come back to them in the future. Right now, we're just focusing on people that already know about this topic, already know it's something that they want to do. They just don't know that we exist, and they don't know that it's simple, that the sign up is actually quite simple project, right? So our focus has kind of shifted. Less is like a general informational website selling the product in that sense, and more like a, hey, for someone that's already interested in this, trying to introduce us and be like, this is what we have. This is maybe, why we want to give them the information so that they can feel comfortable choosing us. Whereas with someone new, you're just giving them the information to feel comfortable choosing cryonics, right? And those are two different things, right? And it's something that I noticed also with consultations that I gave, the big difference between someone who just heard about the topic and someone who's already knows. The person who's just heard about it is trying to figure out, can they trust the concept of cryonics, right? They're like, is this a real thing? Is this some kind of scam? Like, could this actually work? The people that already knew about it, they'd already figured that stuff out. They were figuring out, okay, can we trust you, right, to be the provider, right? Because it is obviously, there is a lot of trust involved. This is a very long-term project. You're putting your potential life into the hands of an organization. So you want to give people as much information about, okay, how does the funding structure work for long-term stuff? How does the nonprofit stuff work? Kind of what are your medical teams like? What is your process? That kind of information is a lot how we've kind of shifted as we've kind of moved over to focusing more on just kind of catering to people that are already high interest and high knowledge.
That's really interesting as a distinction there. I feel like it also opens up the notion that you really have these two very different pipelines. Maybe that even suggests space for. So one of the roles that, for example, Alcor, I know, bills itself as is an educational organization. They educate people on this idea. So they think of themselves, I think, as an educational and research organization. But it suggests that there's, so there's some component to just educating people on the idea of the distant future, or is cryonics feasible, and all of the questions around convincing somebody that cryonics as a thing might be a good idea. And then, yes, our organization is doing it the right way. We have the right approach, we have the right technique, we're trustworthy as an organization, we'll be around, this is a good place to store yourself, etc. Because I can imagine somebody being completely convinced about cryonics, but then saying, actually, none of the existing organizations are going to make it. None of them are any good. I don't want to sign up, even though absolutely I'm fully convinced about cryonics. anyway, that also lends itself to the notion of this kind of meta organization that could take funding from many different sources to act as an educational source for cryonics as a whole concept, but not necessarily for any individual given organization. And then you guys would come in after that point when the person knows that it's a good idea, and now you want to show them that Tomorrow Bio and EBF and such are a good idea.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think there is a necessity of some kind of education. There will be a time when that should be a focus, is educating the broader public, new people about this and why this is not actually a super crazy thing. I just don't think that cryonics as a field is there yet. I think there is more work to be done in growing a bit larger, right? There are enough people that know about cryonics, that are interested, that first get those people, right? And in that process, you also learn more about how to communicate the topic well, and you figure out a lot of the details a little bit better. More and more PR is happening in the space, and that's something that we're focusing on, because in some ways that will educate new people, but also just because you want to make people that are already high interest know that you exist. There will be a time and a place where maybe more of the focus should be education. I just think realistically, if you want to grow to a little bit of the next phase, you can't aim for that yet. That will come once the topic is a bit bigger, a bit more mainstream. It'll become a bit more palatable for new people. But right now, there are just too many barriers to overcome as people are just being introduced to the topic. It is a kind of like a weird contradiction in some sense, that I think to make this topic more palatable to the mainstream, it first has to become a little bit more mainstream. It sounds a bit weird, but it needs to move a little bit further out of the niche. That's kind of what we're trying to do right now before we can start making it maybe something for new people.
I get where you're coming from, and I get what you're saying. I do wonder, maybe there's 10,000 people in the world who know about cryonics, think it's a good idea, are convinced that they want to do it, but haven't signed up. Obviously, vast majority of those have not signed up with any, or most of those maybe have not signed up with any organization. So if the difference is, so if that number were grown by an order of magnitude, does that mean that there would be that many more people that would now be coming to Tomorrow Bio for you guys to be able to describe that? In other words, like, is I honestly don't understand if it's better to focus on that bigger number as a part of that part of the funnel, or is it better to focus more directly on, okay, let's take that as a given that there is this number of people who are already interested in cryonics, and let's grow the ones that end up making it through the rest of the funnel and all the way into being signed up.
Right. The problem with the option of focusing on the larger funnel is that it's what we've been trying, and it just doesn't work well.
Okay. Yeah.
The problem is, like, maybe it will. Maybe all the kind of leads that we've been emailing and talking to that are new to the topic, maybe in 4 years they're all going to sign up. Awesome. Then great. But having the strategy of your organization rely on that kind of hope that these people will all convert one day, and that you're convincing will work, and they're just a few years runway, right? It's a very risky strategy.
Yeah, that's dangerous. Yeah.
It's a very hope-based strategy, and it's just not the best way to run an organization. So from our perspective, it's not like we're completely ignoring anyone that doesn't know about the topic, right? We are doing PR that generally introduces, and we still write blog posts that help, people that are just coming to this topic. But if you want to get to the point where you already have a bigger membership, which gives you ability to fundraise more, which gives you more, obviously, revenue, and that more stability, then it's just a terrible strategy to focus on this funnel and just like hope that it'll work in 3, 4, 5, whatever many years. That's kind of the conclusion that we've come to.
And then on a more practical note, were you guys originally Tomorrow Biostasis, and now you're Tomorrow Bio? So did you, this is like a full rebranding? Yeah.
So like the legal name is still Tomorrow Biostasis. So don't worry, to any members, your contracts are all still valid and everything. But yeah, we've kind of shortened it to Tomorrow Bio. Just make it makes it a bit more of a kind of there's a lot of these tech companies that are now that, got the .bio. So we jumped on that bandwagon a little bit, just makes it a little bit easier to remember, rolls off the tongue. But there's not really any like big change. It was just a kind of small decision that we decided to shorten it. But it's not a huge rebrand, I wouldn't say.
But you still prefer the term biostasis over cryonics?
Yeah, although I think Emil has loosened up on that a little bit. I think he was initially worried about kind of some of the negative connotations that have come with cryonics in the past. I think now he thinks those are maybe not as big of a deal as he initially guessed. But in general, we still like the term biostasis because that biostasis is describing kind of the state in which you want the patient to be, whereas cryonics is very attached to a specific method, which may or may not always be the best method. Like with research and whatnot, we may discover that like cryopreservation is actually not the best thing anymore. We might find a new thing, and then being called biostasis, like being focused on biostasis, you're not like married to a concept, and you're like it can be a little bit more. It's more supposed to represent being agnostic to the method and being focused on the result.
And I, for one, am happy because Max and I both have to say tomorrow biostasis quite often. So to save those 3 syllables for changing the name will save us a lot of time in the long run. For those who don't know, and I think we alluded to it in her bio, Rebecca recently became one of the elite and venerated moderators over at the Cryosphere Discord server. She had to go through an elaborate and secretive initiation rites and hazing process. We can't really talk about it here on the show, but rest assured, she made it through in one piece, and now she is one of our in the inner sanctum. So Rebecca,
most secret of secret societies in all of cryonics.
Absolutely,
very
yeah.
It's not a secret that exists, but all of our practices and procedures very secretive.
And so, speaking of this secret, and obviously keeping the things that you shouldn't say from the podcast, how are you enjoying being part of this exclusive club?
Good. I really like Discord as opposed to kind of any other mod position like Reddit or wherever else people are mods. I like how much we can kind of have the chance to mold the community and the direction and the topics a lot. So I've really enjoyed getting in the process of thinking about like, what do we want Cryonicists to be able to do? How do we want them to communicate, setting the tone and the topics? It's been a really fun change of pace because it's obviously very different from what I do in my day-to-day Cryonics job.
Also, can make this announcement here as well. Have taken the Tomorrow Biostasis hub, and it has migrated over to the Cryosphere Discord server with a lot of your assistance. Can you tell us a little bit about the thinking on that and why that was a good idea, and any other thoughts you have on it?
Yeah, so I wasn't really involved in the creation of the Biostasis Hub. That was kind of a marketing project a little while back. But to my understanding, the idea of it was it would be a place for us to kind of communicate directly with our members, also, prospective members in Europe, and kind of have kind of a centralized area where they could gather, discuss, and we could have that two-way discussion. But I think it's kind of became more clear that cryonics is a very small field. We're all, I think, us as an organization, I think also the other organizations are in this kind of very positive sum mindset where we're so small, we all want everyone to succeed and just help make this thing bigger. And I think the same effect kind of comes also with community and having the ability to have like a larger community, having people from other organizations, other perspectives, working on different cryonics projects, having those in one space to kind of bring together, there's like more value to that. And obviously you were receptive to also giving us kind of channels where we could still have that direct communication with members, but so we weren't thinking we were kind of losing something very important with the Biostasis Hub, but we were kind of gaining the ability to give our members, prospective members, the access to a larger community where everyone's kind of like synergizing off of each other, hopefully. And of course, you guys have just generally done a great job, I think, with the Cryosphere and put a lot of energy and thought into growing that as a community, which we also wanted to support.
And just we'll give kind of listeners some kind of insight into some things we're thinking about. If you could choose one or two ideas you have or have had, even if we've already discussed it, that you think would be useful for improving the server long term, or would just be useful for the community, you know, within the Discord server.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so something new that I think I've only briefly spoken to with Max, actually, so very new. We'll see if we actually end up doing some kind of like book club, which would be kind of a chance for exactly what that will look like. We're not sure, but it's something I've noticed is kind of missing. And there is a lot of already in-depth discussion about a lot of philosophical stuff on the Cryosphere, which has been really cool. That's something that I think could add more of that discussion. And other things that have already been kind of implemented is reworking the onboarding, I guess, to the Cryosphere. That's something that we've been improving. And yeah, hopefully the Tomorrow channels are also an addition. They're not just meant for Tomorrow members, by the way. So don't think anyone who's on there that you can only write in the Tomorrow chat if you want to ask a question directly about Tomorrow, or if you're a member. It's hopefully something that leads to interesting discussions for everyone on the server.
Right, and I hope for anybody who works at Alcor or CI is listening to this, that they take an example from you guys and kind of seeing that there's a clear benefit from staying in communication and kind of integrating into the community and keeping your ears to the ground. So we welcome either any of the organizations to also have some channels on the Cryosphere, and we hope they do consider it, even if not immediately, but we are open to that. We're not exclusive to any organization. In any case, that's my little pitch. And we also recently started a Women in Cryonics channel, which is led by yourself and Nikki Olson. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what was the thinking behind that?
Sure. So we can't take credit for the thinking behind that because it wasn't actually my idea originally. But the concept is women in cryonics are unfortunately a bit of a rare species. So we wanted to give kind of a space for just the women in cryonics to discuss with no other eyes, where they would feel comfortable talking about things that's maybe not relatable to the average male cryonicist. And of course, there are some spaces out there in the cryonics field that are a little toxic at times. So this was a little bit of a haven, I guess, where we could discuss without worry of judgment about anything related to being a woman in cryonics. So if you're interested in joining, send a DM to me or Nikki, and we can get you in there.
So, why are there so few women in cryonics? We every woman we ask the same question.
Yeah, it's a hard question. I have some ideas, but no real answers. It does seem from the people that I've talked to, and I think I've even discussed this with Daniel before, and he's made a similar observation that when men think about cryonics, they see it more as an individual choice, whereas women often see it as kind of a social one. So, for example, a man is more likely to say, I want to sign up for cryonics, so I'm going to do it. I hope my family does it as well, but even if they don't, I'm doing this because I want to do it. Whereas it's much more likely when talking to women, that they'll say, I'll do it if all of my family does it, if this and that, which why that's more common the case, I don't know. For me personally, I relate more to the typical, I guess, men's side, which is maybe why I am a woman who ended up signing up for Cryonics, because I do view it more as an individual choice. So I think that's kind of goes to show that this isn't the case for all women and all men, of course, but when you're talking about on average, you will see some differences, and that could be part of the reason explaining that difference. And the other reasons are that I suspect might have something to do with that is that we've noticed a lot of our members are in the tech space in some way. We have a lot of software developers, like a disproportionate number of software developers who are statistically also just more likely to be men, right? And also, different groups like effective altruism, less wrong, are also disproportionately representative in Cryonicists, also disproportionately men. So there could also be an aspect to that where the fields that would make someone more open-minded or thinking about chronics are also happen to be more dominant by men. But all of these are theories. Why exactly this is the case, it's hard to say, but I think it's a kind of a multitude of different factors.
Out of curiosity, and I don't know if you guys are willing to share this information, but are you able to tell us what percentage of your signups are male versus female?
I don't know the exact number right now, but it is around 80% men.
Interesting. Yeah. In the survey, and again, more details on that to come, but one thing I can say of the survey results, 85% men, approximately. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it matches up with your number, 85%. So it's if one were to look at other things that are related, like people in tech space, is it that about 80 or 85% of the people in the tech space are men? What about people who like sci-fi? Is it 80 or 85% of people who like sci-fi, more traditional sci-fi, are men? So it would be interesting to see where all these numbers match up.
My guess is going to be that whatever it is, it's not just one thing. It's just a kind of combination of different variables.
We doing questions from the Cryosphere. So we're asking Discord members in advance if they have any questions to ask the upcoming guest. So we just wanted to throw one of those by you today. It is from Lemfet. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Who would like to know some more about any research and development plans you have at Tomorrow Bio.
Mm-hmm. So for like a very in-depth analysis of that, you would be better to talk to one of our researchers, or Emil or Rishi. But on a high level, the research that's done at Tomorrow is mostly like on the D side of R&D, so development. So this is a lot of like engineering stuff and like building new things. Like one thing that we recently did is we built and ran a few tests with these transport boxes that basically can gradually cool a patient while they're in transit. So this would be something that could be used if you need to transport a patient by plane, because traditionally this is done in a Ziegler case, which keeps the patient at dry ice temperature. The problem with dry ice temperature is that it's like ideal for ice nucleation. It's like not really a temperature you want to keep someone at for a long time. It's otherwise ice crystals form. So we've tested and made a design and then run a few tests to see how long you could make it last if you can really gradually cool. To be clear, it's not certain yet whether this is necessarily better, right? There are some potential disadvantages to the gradual cooling over keeping at the same temperature. So we've made a model and we made it work, but we're not 100% certain yet if this is the better option, but it's something that we're investigating. So that's the kind of stuff that Tomorrow does. And then the European Biostasis Foundation is doing more basic and translational research. So more kind of the long-term types, like investigating different, cryoprotective agent combination, that kind of more lab type work is the type of stuff done at EBF. But yeah, I couldn't give you a more detailed breakdown beyond that.
Oh, and thank you for that. And thank you, Lemfet, for your question.
Well, let's and with that said, then let's dive into the final exciting segment of our conversation. And we always like to end on the note of end on the subject of overrated and underrated. So in this segment, you just tell us, we give you some concepts, something that we're thinking about, and you tell us whether it's overrated, underrated, and a few words as to why that might be the case. So the first one is living in Germany versus living in the United States.
I would say underrated. I think I like the US, and I could see myself potentially living there again in the future. But there's a lot of basic quality of life things that are in Germany that are just amazing. The public transport and the walkability is just great. It really, and the fact that you can like drive 2 hours and be in a new country, pretty amazing. Just the basic living expenses in most places in Europe are also less expensive. You don't have these crazy like healthcare, in debt things. Like you don't have to worry about any of those things. Generally, yeah, I would say not necessarily that Europe is better. It has its pros and cons, but I think people in the US should consider Europe a little bit more.
But is that's not just because of Berlin, right? It's not just that Berlin happens to be particularly good in this. I mean, if you were living in like southern France or something, you might have a different conception of this, I think, right?
Yeah, I think Europe-wide, I haven't lived everywhere in Europe, but everywhere in Europe that I have lived has just way better public transport. General, their necessities are less expensive. You're always close to a new country. If you're just talking Berlin-wise, I could give you even more reasons why Berlin is cool, but I was thinking more generally.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of quality of life reasons.
Yeah.
Life extension, particularly for people who think of it as kind of in place of cryonics or in lieu of cryonics.
That I would say is overrated. So if you're talking about like a mainstream person and their conception about longevity, I would say it's underrated. But if you're specifically, which I think you were referring to people that are into the longevity space, want to live longer and are kind of betting on this longevity thing, then I think it's overrated. I think there's always these like different mice studies that everyone's pointing to about all these different promises. We can cure everything in mice at this point. We can make mice immortal and cure every kind of cancer. Like there is a big difference between mice and human. And while a lot of things are getting better, we to this day have never actually developed a procedure or medicine that can stop or reverse aging. Even despite all the hype that you might think that we've never actually done that in the history of humankind. Unfortunately, extended the maximum lifespan, not just like made certain things better.
Yeah.
So, I think people that are betting on that, they should talk to Emil because he used to work in longevity, right? He started in that field. That was his goal, and he knows a lot about what's going on there and why it's probably not going to develop as quickly as we would hope.
Yeah, there's some folks in that space that would say that cryonics is good, but only if you're particularly old.
Yeah.
But if you're young, then if you're not yet middle aged or whatever, don't worry about cryonics so much. Life extension, that's the way to go. But I think you and I we're on the same page that better to cover yourself by having cryonics ready. And if life extension comes through before that is needed, then great. That's wonderful, but don't count on that.
Yeah.
And
the problem too is if everybody has that mentality and then they end up being wrong, then they're gonna, when they're old, even if they happen to be wealthy enough, they can afford it last minute, they didn't die in a cry crash early, they make it to that age. If too many people have that mentality and nobody signed up for cryonics, then cryonics doesn't improve in between their youth and their old age. But if people, for their own benefit and security, sign up young, they also benefit in the larger picture of helping the field grow and improve the amount of medical teams there are, improve the process, and all those kinds of things. So even if you think, I'm sure I'll live till 80, it can still be beneficial to sign up, because if everyone thinks that way, then we're not going to get very far with cryonics.
Yeah. So signing up young means that you've contributed to the field for decade after decade.
Yeah.
And so when you need the services, they will be in a better position than had you not signed up when you were young.
Yeah.
Well, and not only that though, your parents and your grandparents, they may not make it to longevity escape velocity. So I'm surprised more people who are like not concerned for themselves, and it might just be that they don't think their parents or grandparents are interested in either of these topics, or so they're just making it from a very individualistic perspective. But I do think your older family members are if you're going to take advantage of longevity, they may not. So there's still some reason why you should care about it, even if only for them.
EA, effective altruism. Overrated or underrated?
I would say underrated. I don't know if I'm an effective altruist, but I would say I'm effective altruist adjacent. I think the core principle of thinking about helping and doing so rationally and efficiently. I think that's a noble cause, and I think a lot of the criticisms EA gets are a little silly. Not that there's no criticism that's warranted, but overall, I think this is like a very positive movement, and that gets people thinking about the long term and the big picture in a way that I think the world needs more of.
Runaway AI leading to a paperclip maximizer style scenario, or something equally bad that certainly would be bad for our Cryonicists.
Like, do you mean obviously that would be bad, but you mean
right? But do you think it's a concern that's an over? Are we too concerned about it, or are we? Let's limit ourselves also to not the normal person out on the street, which hasn't even heard of this stuff, or I guess only thinks about Terminator or something. But for people in these circles who are thinking about cryonics and such, do you think that the concern about that runaway AI going in the wrong direction is a little too strong, or do you think it's properly calibrated or under calibrated?
Yeah, I would say lean towards underrated. So I'm not someone that thinks that like we're just around the corner any day now, any year now, we're about to get this AI explosion and then everything will be over. I have more conservative estimates on the timeline than maybe a lot of those doomsayers, but I think in the longer term, AI that's misaligned does have a very high, it is one of the most potentially dangerous things that humanity will, I think, probably encounter at some point. So while I don't think it's something we need to obsess and only focus on, because I think it's right around the corner, as a cryonicist, I think in 150 years, I might be sitting in a doer. And at that point, it might be a real concern. So I think setting the stage to have more people invest in kind of alignment and safety mechanisms along the way will increase the likelihood that if/when this AI exists, that it helps us cryonicists and doesn't squander our chances of making it to the future.
Yeah, I guess in our lifetimes means something different to Cryonicists than it does for the average person.
Yeah.
While we're on the topic of AI, since we're a hip, cool podcast that stays up to date with current events, overrated, underrated, Chat GPT, if you've had a chance to try it.
I have. I think, that's actually hard, because I think it's great, but a lot of other people do too. So, so maybe it's then I'd maybe say slightly overrated. I think it's really cool, but I think some people are overestimating how much, at least this version of AI will. I have a lot of people that are convinced that like so many jobs are about to be gone, and I think that's a little bit premature. I think eventually AI is going to get a lot better, but I think where it is right now, it's just like a really cool tool that hopefully improves more with time.
The big question is how do we define eventually? Is eventually version 4, version 5, or is eventually version 10? But eventually, it's sooner than I think most people realize that.
Yeah, so. I agree that might be the case. I just don't think, I think there's a lot of people that think this version already is going to change everything about jobs, and I think that's a little bit jumping the gun.
So underrated to some extent, but Joke's on you. Surprise, surprise. This entire podcast script was written by ChatGPT.
Wow.
You typed in, write us a great podcast with Rebecca Ziegler, and every question was written by AI. We had nothing to do with it. Overrated, underrated, Minecraft.
I do like some Minecraft. I would say maybe a little bit underrated. I don't play a lot of video games, but when I do, it's usually some Minecraft with my siblings.
Okay. And lastly, overrated, underrated, hosting Ukrainian refugees.
I'd say that's underrated. So I've been hosting one here in Berlin, a 16-year-old Ukrainian refugee, and it's been great. I recommend anyone who can help, not just in these kind of crises, but in the general spirit of EA, or just, making the world a better place, which I think Cryonicists all hope the world becomes better, because, we're invested here for the long term. I think it's good to do what you can.
Well, on that note, we shall call it there. Rebecca, are there specific places where people can follow you or reach out to you or anything of that nature?
Sure. Obviously Discord on the Cryosphere, you can find me chatting. I also have a Twitter that I don't tweet that often, but every now and then I maybe will say something interesting about Cryonics. The handle there is, I think, Rebecca Ziegler. And yeah, otherwise I think mainly for discussion, Discord is the best.
No, you heard it here. You heard it from somebody other than us. Discord, get to the Cryosphere. Well, I guess you are a Cryosphere mod. So with that, we will leave any notes and any other comments and interesting things down in the description, show notes, that kind of thing. You can find it wherever you're looking, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on audio. And Rebecca, thank you very much for joining us.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
All right. Rebecca Ziegler has left our virtual studio and gone back into the realm of the Cryosphere and her, her daily life in Europe and with Tomorrow Bio. Daniel, what did you think about that epic conversation?
I have been hoping we could have this conversation and kind of update the viewers and the listeners on Tomorrow Bio. It's been quite a while since we had Emil on here to tell us how things were going. I thought Rebecca was great. I think she's an excellent spokesman for Tomorrow Bio. She has well-rounded knowledge about the organization, especially since she's straddling both the medical side of things and the business side of things. And furthermore, she's good at conveying that information to the public. So I think that's a very valuable skill.
Yeah, I would add that she's definitely been a huge asset to the Cryosphere. She's setting herself up to be a big name in cryonics going forward. So she's going to be someone to keep an eye on, someone to look out for. And she's certainly young enough that if she wants to stay with this industry for a good while, she will be able to make quite an impact on it. And I continue to be a big fan of Tomorrow Bio in the way that they've structured their organization in the sort of for-profit, non-profit way in which they, Emil and the others have created the right kind of incentive structures to have the ability to adapt, the ability to remain flexible to changing conditions, to developments in the market and technologies in the way people are thinking about this. I hope that there's something that the existing, the traditional, the organizations, cryonics organizations can take from this model. That's not to say that they're going to completely remake their organizations, but maybe there's some useful aspects of Tomorrow Bio's approach that they can lift out and replicate to help to make them more adaptable and more flexible going forward, because I think that'll benefit us all. I mentioned the survey. There will be a full-fledged podcast episode here on the survey at some point in the future, likely after I've had a chance to publish some written information on the results of the survey. So stay tuned for that. Don't know if it's going to be the next episode or one of the ones after that, but we will be getting on that. So Daniel, any closing thoughts?
No, I think I'm good. We will see everybody next time.
All right. Goodbye.